Hello, everyone. We are here today to do the next episode of Pharmacy Law Lowdown, sponsored by Drug Topics. I'm joined today, of course, by my colleague and also my friend, Dae Lee.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining today.
All right, so today we're going to talk about a topic that might fly under the radar a little bit, depending on where you stand in the pharmacy space, but that is the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, also known as the DSCSA. So we just want to talk about a couple of provisions of the Drug Supply Chain and Security Act that are set to take effect in 2026. Now, the good news for you, if you're affected by this, is it hasn't taken effect just yet. So if you weren't aware of it, you still have time, but you want to make sure you're prepared. If you were aware of this and you are prepared for it, then hopefully this is just a refresher for you. But let's dive right in and talk about this.
Yeah, start from the basic, simple. What is DSCSA?
Well, the DSCSA is part of the DQSA, the Drug Quality Security Act. Um, and there's a lot of component parts to the DSCSA, but I would say for the stuff that we're discussing today, I think the big thing is that the purpose behind the DSCSA was really to focus on the ability to trace products or product tracing documentation throughout the distribution chain, to prevent introduction of harmful drugs into and to remove drugs from the supply chain where appropriate. So I really think it's kind of looking at the movement of drug products from their inception from the manufacturer ultimately to the dispenser, but most importantly to the patient. So this is what really gives the ability to monitor and follow drugs all throughout the country.
So, is it fair to say that DSCSA is applicable to, every stakeholders who touch a drug product?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think that that's an accurate statement. It's the DSCSA is really going to touch on all the various stakeholders. Now, to give some specifics as to the entities covered, I think that would include manufacturers, repackagers, wholesale distributors, third-party logistics providers, and also importantly, especially for what we're talking about today, dispensers. So a lot of different stakeholders.
And dispensers as pharmacies.
Yeah, yeah. And there's actually a definition in this, for the purposes of dispensers, we're really talking about retail pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, a group of chain pharmacies under common ownership or control that do not act as a wholesale distributor. That really kind of covers the notion of dispensers in this context. There is some other provisions that says any other person authorized by law to dispense or administer prescription drugs and the affiliated warehouses or distribution centers of such entities under common ownership and control that do not act as a wholesale distributor. But yeah, I mean, I think especially knowing that a lot of our audience are working at the pharmacy level, they're definitely contemplated within this definition of dispenser.
And if I recall correctly, the DSCSA has not fully kicked in for pharmacies, right? Isn't it November of 2026?
Yeah, that's correct, A. Couple of things. It's kind of hard to believe because the Drug Quality and Security Act was enacted in 2013, November 2013. So that was over 10 years ago. Um, Originally, the statutory deadline for what we're talking about today was November 2023. But of course, there was definitely a realization that some of these provisions were onerous and were going to take a lot of time to enact. So they wanted to give stakeholders and the impacted stakeholders, especially, time for compliance. So there was a series of extensions. This is the last one. Um, there's really no reason to believe this is going to be extended any further. But as of November 27th, 2026, this final provision related to dispensers is set to take effect.
And then the provision requires, I believe, pharmacists to have T3 documents, right? Or pedigrees, whether it be transaction information, statement, or history that actually captures, the flow of the product in the drug supply chain, ranging from starting from the manufacturers down to the dispensers. Now, I mean, you and I, we represent a lot of independent pharmacies. And our experience has been, even though DSCSA has not fully kicked in for the pharmacies, but it kind of kicked in a sense that um, a lot of these documents were have been requested by pharmacy benefit managers, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the notion of one of the big implications here is that requirement to only accept or transfer ownership of product that it's accompanied by what we often call a T3. And that's basically a document that includes a transaction history or TH, transaction information TI, and a transaction statement TS. So that's where you get this notion of T3 statement. Um, but yeah, that's one of the really critical components. And to your point, pharmacies in many ways have gotten conversant with this. Although I do want to reiterate, there's a difference between compliance with the law and compliance with private contracts. But the reason why we say that pharmacies have become very conversant in this is because, in many ways, PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers have been requiring this now for many, many, many years.
Right. And then when do you see them most, those requests? Isn't it during like an audit and more specifically drug invoice shortage audits or invoice reconciliation audits?
Yeah, that's absolutely right as well. Um, One of the many functions that pharmacy benefit managers perform is they audit prescription drug claims. What does that mean? It means that an auditor from a pharmacy benefit manager will work with a pharmacy to basically look at a large number of claims. Usually it's anywhere from a 1 to 2 year period of claims. And I would say one of the most tried and true types of audits that a pharmacy benefit manager will conduct is an inventory audit. They use different names. Some call it an inventory reconciliation, an invoice audit, or a purchase audit, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's reconciling inventory. And basically, the PBM taking a look at the records to confirm that for every drug that you tell us you submitted for reimbursement and also at the same time dispensed to patients, that you had enough inventory on your shelves during the relevant time period to cover all of those claims. Because obviously, if they looked at this and you couldn't show through purchase records that you had enough inventory, clearly that would be a cause for concern. But a big component of that audit is not just making sure you had enough inventory, it's also making sure that the inventory came from reputable wholesalers. And that's really important. Now, I want to be clear that doesn't always mean that, or I should say, pharmacy benefit managers have found ways to use the notion of an inventory audit to justify, in many cases, substantial recoupments. But I want to say at their origins, and the best version of an inventory audit is making sure that there was sufficient inventory to support claims, but also that the product was acquired from safe, reliable, and reputable wholesalers.
Right. And then, but at the same time, different PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers have different requirements, audit requirement, different supplier requirements. So I think it would be helpful for the listeners to hear from you what a reputable source or supplier means, like such as authorized trading partner or manufacturer authorized suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you a couple examples of, publicly available information is one major PBM, one of the three largest PBMs in the country, they have a requirement that pharmacies need to purchase from what's called an NABP accredited wholesaler. NABP stands for National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, which is an organization that essentially represents all of the state boards of pharmacy throughout the country. So NABP accreditation is essentially a stamp of approval that if you have NABP accreditation, it means you're meeting certain standards. And I want to be clear that if you have NABP accreditation and it is up to date and it is current, it really does say something about the operations. It's a rigorous and onerous process. Not just anyone can obtain NABP accreditation. So it is definitely a um, way of showing that the products are acquired and and handled in a very responsible manner. Now, it doesn't mean that just because an organization is NABP accredited that they're infallible or that there couldn't still be a mistake. But I would say that NABP accreditation is definitely a very high standard to meet. By contrast, another type of a requirement, and I shouldn't say in contrast because there is a lot of overlap between NABP accreditation and another requirement that we often see, which is called an authorized trading partner or an authorized distributor. And that is a list that is usually prepared by a manufacturer of a particular product. And so what that is essentially the manufacturer saying, we make the following types of products, and here's a list of the wholesalers that we authorize to deal with our products and to sell our products. If the manufacturer is not on this list, they're not authorized. Now, what I would say is, and there's a lot of factors that go into looking at this. Just because a product is not obtained from a manufacturer identified authorized trading partner does not mean that the product, is illegal or improper, so on and so forth. But it also means that it was acquired from someone who's not an authorized trading partner. So I do believe that it is important for anyone that's acquiring product from someone who's not an authorized trading partner to do a lot of due diligence. So what are some of the things we see? Well, first of all, not all authorized trading partners are necessarily NABP accredited, and not all NABP accredited wholesalers are necessarily authorized trading partners. So I think that's one important distinction.
Right, and then if you happen to buy from non-NABP or non-manufacturer facturer authorized wholesaler, it can lead to potentially discrepancy found in an audit, and then that can lead to financial recoupment by the PBM from the pharmacy, as well as network interruption, such as suspension or termination. So it's very important that the pharmacies are apprised of different um, requirements set forth by the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, but also, going into Q4 of 2026 down the road, pharmacies must, they have to be vigilant in terms of complying with the DSCSA because what you and I foresee is PBMs have already been requesting these types of documents from pharmacies. They are going to double down on the DSCSA requirements, more audits, but that should not cause any concern. Pharmacists should take this more of an opportunity to be prepared and to protect their business interest. Do you have any other closing sentences or closing statements for the pharmacy listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, I think on this one, the big takeaway is when, I want to make sure it's clear when you're dealing with NABP accredited wholesalers or authorized trading partners, I think you're going to see that it's that much easier to comply with the DSCSA because almost always, without exception, what's going to accompany those purchases is a T3 that's easily and readily available and findable when necessary. Um, Not necessarily always the case if you deviate from these. So I think the big takeaway is adopt great purchasing practices, great standard operating procedures, don't make exceptions. Any sense of cost savings that you believe you're going to recognize from deviating from this is potentially going to be lost through a recoupment or some other type of a legal action. So I think at the end of the day, the big takeaway here is understand your obligations under both the law and your contracts with payers and adopt policies and procedures that reflect those requirements.
Thank you. I mean, that's a lot for today. So we'll come back at another episode with a lot of more new updates in the pharmacy industry.